Hello, everyone. Good to see you again. I'm Anne-Marie Green.
And I'm Vladimir Dutin. Do you know what day it is today?
No. Why do you set me up like that?
It's the premiere of Star Wars.
Oh, my gosh. This should be like a holiday for you. What are you doing there?
I know. I would not be here if not for all the incredible news we're going to share with our audience right now, starting with this, Anne-Marie.
Right,
Congress, they're headed home for the holidays, leaving plans for an upcoming Senate trial for President Trump's impeachment in limbo. Top congressional leaders have reached a standoff over potential witnesses, timing, and testimony in the trial.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell accuses House Speaker Nancy Pelosi of being, quote, too afraid to present her party's case against the president. But the speaker argues that she's only delaying sending the articles until the Senate can present a plan for a fair trial. Nancy Cortez has the latest.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says she needs to know more about what this Senate trial is going to look like before she sends the articles of impeachment to the Senate. But the Senate's Republican leader, Mitch McConnell, after meeting with his Democratic counterpart Chuck Schumer yesterday, said the two sides are at an impasse.
I'm not sure what leverage there is in refraining from sending us something we do not want.
Leader McConnell called the Democrats' case for impeachment weak after Speaker Pelosi suggested she might wait to send the articles of impeachment to the Senate.
We'll see whether House Democrats ever want to work up the courage to actually take their accusations to trial.
Frankly, I don't care what the Republicans say.
Pelosi was just as scathing about McConnell, who has vowed to work in lockstep with the White House on this trial.
Our founders, when they wrote the Constitution, they suspected that there could be a rogue president. I don't think they suspected that we could have a rogue president and a rogue leader in the Senate at the same time.
She has the backing of House Democrats, who are looking for ways to pressure the Senate into calling key witnesses, like acting White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney and former National Security Advisor John Bolton.
Chairman, do you run the risk of looking like you're playing games with impeachment if you delay the transfer of the articles?
We are not playing games with impeachment. This is the third time in our history. We wouldn't have done it if we weren't deadly serious.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer had his first meeting with McConnell about the trial yesterday.
I told Leader McConnell that we would not support any trial without witnesses and documents.
South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham called the Democratic strategy constitutional extortion.
I just left President Trump. He's mad as hell that they would do this to him and now deny him his day in court.
All these ultimatums essentially amount to opening salvos in a negotiation that will stretch through the holidays over how long and how comprehensive this Senate trial will be. And it's important, Vlad and Anne-Marie, because this is the trial that will determine whether President Trump stays in office.
All right, Nancy Cortez, thank you very much.
So we are going to bring in CBSN political contributor Molly Hooper to break this all down. So we already know that one of the sticking points with the negotiations in the Senate trial is additional witnesses, right? So that aside, what does Nancy Pelosi want to see so that she can be confident that this will be a fair trial?
Well, that's the question, because essentially now that the House has actually voted on the articles of impeachment, even though they haven't appointed House managers, and perhaps constitutional law scholars will differ with me, it doesn't say anything in the Constitution about House managers. Articles of impeachment, that's handled in the House. The Senate has the sole authority to try the impeachment. And so it's unclear, because if you go back to when Clinton was president and they went through this whole process, 100 senators behind closed doors in the old Senate chamber got together and agreed on essentially structuring the process so that they could have a timeline, agree to like when people would give opening statements, how long they would be. But what they specifically did, because it was a contentious issue, they decided to prolong the issue of witnesses until a few weeks into the actual impeachment trial, because they said, oh, maybe we'll learn something that changes our minds. Whatever it is, it's just a contentious issue all around. And so it's unclear what's going on. It's unclear what she's doing right now.
Right, what the end game is.
So you heard in Nancy's piece that Democrats would love to call some key witnesses, including the acting chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney. They want to hear from John Bolton, the national security advisor, former national security advisor. the president seems to be indicating on Twitter that, you know, he wants a fair trial in the sense that he wants people to get up there and tell what he believes is a description of a perfect call, a perfect relationship with Ukraine. If the Senate were to agree to bring some of these witnesses, would Democrats then consider a fair trial?
Are you talking about Joe Biden? Because there's some Senate Republicans. Exactly. Hunter Biden. We've heard people wanting to talk to Mike Pompeo, Hunter Biden, Joe Biden about the Burisma dealings.
Right.
I mean, that's what some of these Republicans are saying. But
in other words, you're saying that Republicans that you're talking to would love to see some of those people testify in front of, and they can bring them, right?
Exactly. But
would
see, that's
they
the
love
question.
to see those people?
I don't.
Because Mitch McConnell says he wants this to be wrapped up very quickly. I mean, what's the benefit of putting a Hunter Biden, having him questioned?
Exactly, and there is this issue of Senate sort of cordiality, and Joe Biden was a member of the Senate for decades.
Yeah.
And that's something that's not lost on a senator like Lindsey Graham.
Mm-hmm.
And he said as much, which is why you're seeing people like Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell pushing to just get this thing over with, almost like let's just move to dismiss this outright, because they could do that. And so that right now we're sort of in this procedural doldrums, if you will, because basically Mitch McConnell said, hey, we're coming back January 6th. The House is out until about January 6th, the first week of January. And right now it's a time when hopefully Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer will start talking about this procedure moving forward, because right now it's just unclear what is happening. I've heard some people say, well, is the president really impeached if the articles? Well, just ask those Democrats who voted the other day.
Sure.
Yeah,
did you impeach the president?
So let me ask you a question. You know, because we have said all along the way that it certainly seems like it's a foregone conclusion the way the Senate is going to vote, right? So then after that, what's in flux is how the American people feel about this process. Nancy Pelosi says it's going to be an unfair trial. That's why I'm playing hardball with them. What are the Republicans saying? Up until now, they've been complaining that the process is flawed. So now they're in charge of this portion of the process. How are they framing it for the American people?
Well, and see, this is actually giving Republicans some pretty strong talking points. In fact, Mitch McConnell, late yesterday, after having a quote-unquote cordial meeting with his Senate Democratic counterpart, Chuck Schumer, basically said, listen, I'm not sure what Speaker Pelosi is doing here, because I don't know what leverage she has in refraining us from doing something we don't want to do in the first place, right? They don't really want this trial. Right. Even back in the 1999, that Senate, even led by Republicans, did not want the impeachment trial of Bill Clinton. It's just they don't want it. And so, there had been this big rush to move through, what was it, like 12 weeks to get through all these proceedings, and then all of a sudden there's like this stopping point. I think not necessarily a better, but a different question to ask is, what do those moderate Democrats in the House think who were put in a very difficult position by voting for these articles of impeachment, not to have them go over to the Senate because of this? It just gives Republicans a lot of talking points. Like, talk about unfair, the Democrats aren't even letting us have a trial and open.
Is there a political risk here, Molly? Are you hearing at all from the people you talk to on the Hill that there's a political risk for the president if the Senate chooses not to bring any witnesses, and you've got Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham and others saying that they've already made up their minds, that the people, folks in America, say, well, here's what the House alleged that the president did, but you didn't have any witnesses because why? Right. And the people who are presiding over the trial said that their minds were made up even before the trial started. So would the president then be able to go onto the campaign trail and say, this was a big nothing because I haven't been removed from office, the Senate didn't find, the Senate acquitted me? Would people make that leap that, yes, you are guilty-free?
I think that
just from the politics,
they might not need to make that leap. I think the president's dropping breadcrumbs leading to that conclusion. But
if you listen to somebody like Lindsey Graham, he really wants what he feels to be vindicated. He thinks that these witnesses will come up and vindicate him.
And vindicate the president.
Exactly, and he wants
so why
a
not
robust,
do it? Why not have him?
Exactly, and Mitch McConnell's like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? Do you know what that entails? You don't know what these witnesses are going to say. They're going to be under oath. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is going to be presiding over this. Every senator has to take an oath to uphold their their office and their responsibility to the Constitution. No, I mean, you don't want that. This is a trial, Mr. President. You're not in control of it. I don't know if you use those exact words, but that's the general sentiment.
You know, what Vlad brought up about the political risk, and as you were like crafting the question, Vlad, I was starting to think about like who are you going to go with? Like, are the Democrats taking a risk? Are the Republicans taking a risk? Because I think for the Democrats, you know, delaying this, you know, if you want to call this a partisan process, you can certainly slap that on the Democrats if you want to. But then the flip side, if the president is innocent, then why not put those witnesses on that will prove that he's innocent?
He's indicated he wants.
Right, and if you're so angry about a partisan process, then why in the Senate, why don't you make it not partisan and have just a fair jury trial?
Well, I think that what we've seen in this whole debate over impeachment is that people's minds are pretty much made up. There hasn't been a lot of movement. It's like what's one man's fact is another man's fiction, it seems like. They're both looking at both parties, both sides. They're all looking at the same transcript and seeing two different versions of what happened. One is nefarious and evil. The other one is just fine. It was a joke. And really, it doesn't seem like a lot of minds are getting changed at this point. And by leaving this door open sort of for Democrats to hold on to these articles, it creates a lot of opportunities, I think, for Republicans to say, this was unfair to begin with because they didn't even send us those articles. Like they weren't even, it's like Republicans aren't even given a chance to be unfair. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But at the same time, one wrinkle that's kind of going on under the surface here, Adam Schiff is still doing investigation. He's still looking into these individuals. In fact, he followed up with Mike Pence earlier this week about a phone call or about a supplemental testimony that his aide Jennifer Williams gave to the Intel Committee about a September 18th call that Pence had with Zelensky, and Adam Schiff is like, why won't you declassify this portion of her deposition? So the Intel Committee is kind of working under the surface, trying to get more information that they can send over to the Senate. But at this point, it's unclear what that will result in before the Senate comes back in January. And, you know, I don't know if this is possible or not, but it just seems to me that the Constitution, Senate has the sole power to try these articles of impeachment. Why not bring it up and say, fine, if you're not sending us managers, okay, we're just going to dismiss it. If you don't want to come to play, then fine.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I could see some arguments being made for that.
Really interesting.
Molly, great talking to you.
Thanks, Molly.
Great talking to you.
Coming up on Face the Nation this Sunday, Margaret Brennan will speak to Republican Senator Roy Blunt and Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen. Face the Nation streams every Sunday at 11 a.m., 3 p.m., and 6 p.m. Eastern, right here on CBSN.